The palace didn't just break its silence, it detonated it, and what spilled out wasn't rumor, wasn't gossip, wasn't whispers in corridors. It was something colder, something final, something that looked like truth carved into stone. And the moment that sealed file hit the world, everything Harry and Meghan thought they could control began slipping through their fingers like it was never theirs to hold in the first place.
This is not a surprise to anybody. It's really sad that it's got to this point, but I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's.
The release didn't feel like an announcement, it felt like an ambush dressed in royal language, precise, calculated, and timed so perfectly that Montecito didn't even have room to breathe before the shockwave hit. Harry read it once, then again, but the words didn't change, and somehow that made it worse, because denial needs cracks to survive, and this had none. Meghan didn't react immediately, not out loud, not visibly, but her stillness said everything. Because when someone who has always known how to respond suddenly freezes, you know the ground beneath them has shifted in a way they didn't anticipate. And that phrase, Dina Profile, didn't just sit on the page, it echoed. Heavy, official, impossible to spin. Because this wasn't opinion anymore. This wasn't narrative anymore, this was documentation. The kind that doesn't fade when headlines move on. The kind that buries itself into history and refuses to be rewritten. And that's where the real tension begins. Because it wasn't just what the palace revealed, it was what they held back. The missing chain, the unexplained path, the silence between the lines that screamed louder than the statement itself. Why hold back details unless those details are explosive? Why release just enough to confirm but not enough to explain? Because control doesn't come from telling everything, it comes from deciding what the world is allowed to question. And suddenly, the balance shifted because once the palace controls the first sentence, every response from Harry and Meghan starts sounding like defense, like reaction, like damage control, and that's a position you can't win from. And here's where it gets colder, because behind every word of that release, there were shadows. Charles, silent but present. William, unseen but unmistakable. Catherine, not speaking yet somehow already central to what this could become. That's not coincidence, that's structure. That's power moving quietly but decisively, and when institutions move like that, it's never just about one moment, it's about everything that comes after. Because this wasn't just about two children being mentioned, it was about what those mentions would mean in records, in titles, in the future of a monarchy that doesn't forget, doesn't forgive easily, and definitely doesn't act without purpose. And inside that file, buried beneath the official tone, there was something else: dates, signatures, decisions that were never meant to see daylight. And if even part of that becomes public, then this stops being a controlled narrative and becomes something far more dangerous. Something that reaches beyond Harry and Meghan and pulls in William, Charles, Catherine, everyone. And that's the real storm forming here. Not the proof itself, but what it connects to, what it threatens to expose, what it quietly implies without ever needing to say it out loud. Harry felt it instantly, not as a prince, not as someone thinking about image or reputation, but as a father, because suddenly this wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't about interviews or headlines. This was about a future moment when Archie and Lilibet would read these words themselves and ask questions no one can answer cleanly. Meghan felt something different, but just as sharp: the realization that once the palace has placed something into official record, it doesn't matter how many interviews you give, how many statements you craft, you're not arguing against people anymore. You're arguing against history, and history doesn't negotiate. And maybe that's why her instinct paused, mid-motion, phone in hand, because every move now carries risk. Every response could open doors that can't be closed again. Because here's the trap, and it's a brutal one: speak, and you validate the conversation, stay silent, and that silence becomes the loudest answer of all. And somewhere behind all of this, the real question keeps growing louder, more uncomfortable, more impossible to ignore. Why now? Why, after years of silence, after distance, after everything that's already been said and done, does the palace choose this moment to act? Because timing like this isn't accidental. It's strategic, it's deliberate, and it suggests something shifted behind closed doors long before the public ever saw a word. Something happened, something changed, something forced a decision that could no longer be delayed. And when institutions like this are forced to act, it's never small, it's never simple, and it's never without consequences that ripple far beyond what anyone expects. And just when it felt like the shock couldn't deepen, it did, because what followed wasn't noise, wasn't chaos, it was something far more unsettling: precision. The palace didn't scramble, didn't react emotionally, didn't even defend itself loudly. It simply adjusted one phrase, removed another, shifted a single reference, and in doing so, it quietly redrew the future of 2 children without ever raising its voice. That's how power really works, not in explosions, but in edits so subtle the world doesn't notice until it's already too late. Meghan saw it immediately, that microscopic change buried inside the second clarification, the removal of a ceremonial link that once symbolized belonging, and in that instant, she understood the damage wasn't coming all at once, it was being applied in layers, controlled, deliberate, impossible to fight without making it worse. Harry felt it differently, like something slipping away that he couldn't grab, couldn't argue with, couldn't even properly name. Because how do you fight something that doesn't attack you directly but still takes something from you piece by piece? And this is where the silence turned dangerous, because silence isn't empty, it's interpreted. Every hour without a response became speculation, every moment of restraint became assumption, and the media didn't wait. It never does. The narrative started shaping itself, headlines forming around absence, not presence, around what wasn't said rather than what was. And suddenly, Harry and Meghan weren't controlling anything, they were reacting to a story that had already moved past them. That's the real shift, the moment when a narrative stops being yours, when it escapes both sides and becomes something bigger, something public, something permanent. And the public didn't hesitate, not this time. They didn't treat it like gossip, they treated it like evidence, like something official, something that demanded interpretation, judgment, conclusion. But beneath all of that noise, something quieter, something almost invisible was happening behind closed doors. And it didn't involve statements or headlines, it involved a conversation no one expected. Meghan didn't go to the media, didn't go legal, didn't escalate publicly, she chose Catherine. And that decision alone says more than any statement ever could, because it reveals where Meghan believed the real influence lived, not in press offices, not in official responses, but in the one person who understood the cost of growing up inside this system before you're ready to carry it. That call wasn't about strategy, it was about survival, about finding a line that could protect Archie and Lilibet before the storm swallowed them completely. And Catherine's response didn't come as a royal figure delivering rehearsed reassurance, it came as something more restrained, more human. And maybe that's why it mattered. She didn't deny the damage, didn't dismiss the situation, didn't pretend everything was fine. She acknowledged the one thing the palace couldn't afford, to lose the distinction between adults and children. And suddenly, the entire emotional weight of the situation shifted. Because if the children are protected, then the consequences fall somewhere else. They fall on Harry. They fall on Meghan. And that's where the story sharpens, where sympathy and judgment split into 2 different directions, one soft, one hard. The public began aligning with that same quiet line, protect the children, question the adults, and once that alignment happens, it's almost impossible to reverse. Harry saw it happening in real time, in headlines, in commentary, in the tone of voices that no longer sounded uncertain but convinced. Meghan saw it too, but she processed it differently, not as defeat, but as a recalibration. Because when you can't control the narrative, you start controlling your exposure to it. And then came the final move, the one that didn't need drama because it carried finality. Charles closed the file, no more statements, no more clarifications, no more back and forth. That wasn't just an ending, it was a signal. The palace had decided the record was complete. And when an institution like that decides something is complete, it doesn't reopen it easily, if ever. That silence from the palace wasn't retreat, it was conclusion. It said everything without saying anything. It told the world that what had been released would stand, that the structure of the monarchy would not bend further, that whatever damage had been done was now part of the record, not something to be negotiated away. And that's where the real weight settles, not in the announcement, not in the reaction, but in what can't be changed anymore. Harry wasn't just facing public judgment, he was facing permanence. Meghan wasn't just managing perception, she was navigating limitation. Because for the first time, their version of events wasn't the dominant one, it was one version among many, and not the one backed by official record. And once that shift happens, once authority moves away from voice and into documentation, everything changes. The power dynamic doesn't just tilt, it locks. But here's the part that lingers, the part that doesn't resolve cleanly, the part that keeps this from feeling finished, because even though the palace closed the file, even though the statement stopped, even though the world moved toward its conclusions, there's still something unresolved sitting beneath all of it. That missing detail, that second name hinted but not revealed, that quiet implication that the full story hasn't actually been told yet. And if that's true, if even a fraction of what's still hidden ever surfaces, then this entire moment, this entire controlled release might not be the ending at all. It might just be the beginning of something far bigger, far messier, and far more impossible to contain.